The ceiling was leaking again. The same brown water stain I reported last month had grown twice its size, and now it dripped directly onto my kitchen counter. I stood in the hallway with my phone recording, the light above me flickering like it always did. Then I heard his voice. "Oh look, it's the building inspector." He laughed from his doorway, wiping his hands on a stained shirt. "What now, sweetheart? Another bug? Another little puddle?" I didn't say a word, just held up the paper I'd been waiting weeks to get. A bright white notice of violation, straight from the city. His smile twitched, then disappeared. Behind me, I made sure the camera caught everything. Because this time, he wasn't the only one watching. I started keeping track the moment I realized the water damage wasn't going away. At first, it was small, a bubbling patch of paint above the shower, a faint musty smell in the corners. But then the walls softened. Mold crept in. Roaches started showing up, bold enough to scurry across my countertop even in broad daylight. Every time I called the landlord, he brushed it off. "I'll send someone next week. You're overreacting. That's just city living, sweetheart." The calls became texts. The texts became unanswered. So I took pictures, videos, every drip, every bug, every time I saw the ceiling leak into the light fixture. I even recorded the thermostat sitting at 55 degrees, when the heat was supposed to be on. When I bumped into him in the hallway and asked again about repairs, he laughed, loudly, right in front of my neighbors. "Tell you what," he said, "maybe you should try paying for a real place next time." It wasn't just me. I started talking to others in the building. Ms. Rosa on the third floor, who hadn't had hot water in 2 weeks. Malik, a single dad on the ground level, whose kids got sick from the black mold behind their radiator. We were all filing complaints, and we were all being ignored. I printed every maintenance request I ever submitted, emailed the building management, called 311 more times than I could count. Once, someone from the office even told me, "Look, he owns 5 properties. He's not going to waste time fixing a cracked tile." A cracked tile? That tile cut my foot when it finally snapped under pressure. Still, no response. That's when I realized this wasn't just neglect. It was a pattern, a system. He counted on people being too tired, too busy, too afraid to fight back. I kept thinking, what happens to the people who don't have time to document everything? What happens when someone doesn't speak English well enough to file a formal report? So I got organized. I made a shared folder, started labeling evidence, collected statements from neighbors. I wasn't sure where it would go, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him keep acting like we didn't matter. And the more I gathered, the clearer it became. He wasn't a careless landlord. He was a slumlord. The tipping point came when I stopped looking at just what was happening inside the building and started looking into the man who owned it. I typed his name into the city's property records one night, not expecting much, just curiosity. But what popped up made my heart stop. 5 buildings, all within a 10-block radius, all registered under different LLCs with odd names. Shell companies. That's why the management company kept acting like they weren't responsible. Technically, they weren't. It got worse. One of the properties had been cited for asbestos 2 years ago. Another had multiple fire code violations. And guess what? The inspectors were scheduled to return, but the follow-ups never happened. That's when it clicked. He wasn't just ignoring complaints. He was dodging accountability altogether. I found PDFs of open violations on the city's housing portal. Some of them dated back 4 years. I cross-referenced them with tenant reviews online, and the stories were all the same. Broken heat, leaky roofs, infestations, intimidation. People moved out. He raised the rent. The cycle continued. That same week, I paid a visit to City Hall. I asked to see public complaint records. The clerk raised her eyebrows when I mentioned his name. "You're not the first asking about him," she said. So I requested full reports, copies of tenant complaints, records of inspection visits, missed follow-ups, even 2 warnings that said final notice stamped in red, warnings that somehow never turned into fines. Back home, I sat in front of my laptop, the light from the screen reflecting off the pages I'd spread across my table. Everything I needed was there. Proof of a pattern. Proof that he'd gamed the system for years. What struck me most wasn't how much he got away with. It was how easy the city made it for him to do so. A fine here, a letter there. But no one ever followed through. Because slumlords like him knew how to operate in the shadows. But now he wasn't in the shadows anymore. He was in my folder, on my timeline. And soon, he'd be in front of the people who had the power to finally stop him. I knew he wouldn't fix anything. That part was clear. But I also knew he had a habit, one I could use. Every time someone from the city showed up, he cleaned just enough to pass a drive-by inspection. The broken buzzer system suddenly worked. The rats would disappear for a day. Even the hallway lights got brighter. But the moment they left, everything slid back to hell. So I waited until he let his guard down. Then, I filed a formal request for a reinspection, not under my name, but through the Tenants Association I quietly helped form. We had just enough signatures to be considered a group complaint. That meant the city had to respond. But I didn't stop there. I bought 2 cheap security cameras, one I placed inside my unit, angled at the leak in my kitchen ceiling, and one I hid by the stairwell, where the wires hung exposed. I made sure they ran for days. Every drip, every spark, every roach, time-stamped, uncut, unedited. Then I tipped off a local housing rights group and sent them everything I had, the footage, the records, the open violations, even the photos of Malik's kids, sleeping in coats. Because there was no heat, they forwarded it to an investigative journalist who'd been chasing slumlords for months. I didn't expect much, but then the phone rang. "Can we meet?" the reporter asked. "Off the record for now." We met at a coffee shop, a few blocks away. I brought a thumb drive. She brought a notepad. I told her everything, not just about my apartment, but about the others. She nodded the whole time, then said 6 words that sent adrenaline straight through me. "We're going to blow this wide open." 2 weeks later, I got a call from the city's housing division. They were conducting a full building inspection. No advance warning, no stage cleanup, a real one. And I knew the landlord had no clue it was coming. That morning, I made coffee like usual, sat by my window, and waited. 3 city vehicles rolled up. Inspectors stepped out, clipboards in hand. The landlord stormed into the hallway in his pajama pants. Caught completely off guard, he asked what this was about. One of the inspectors simply said, "We've received credible documentation." "Step aside, sir." I didn't need to film it. I'd already done my part. Now it was his turn to squirm. From my door, I could hear everything. The inspectors weren't playing around. They split up. One went straight to the basement. Another started in the hallways. And the third asked tenants if they'd be willing to show the inside of their units. I heard Ms. Rose's voice down the hall, shaky but firm, saying, "Yes, please come in. You need to see this." The landlord tried to follow them, kept asking questions, kept trying to control the situation. "You can't just barge into people's homes," he snapped. One of the inspectors turned and said calmly, "They invited us in. That's how this works." He fell silent. Over the next hour, it was like watching a carefully spun web unravel. They saw the exposed wiring, the mold patches, the illegal space heater setup in the basement, a clear fire hazard. They took photos, measured moisture levels, wrote down every detail. He tried to talk his way out of it. "It's just temporary. We were already planning to fix that. Someone must have damaged that after our last repair." The inspectors didn't even argue. They just wrote, asked for documentation, asked for permits, asked for things I knew he didn't have, because I had already checked. And he knew it. The turning point came when one of them pulled out the complaint report and started matching it, line by line, to what they were seeing. "You claimed this leak was resolved last month," she said, pointing at her clipboard. "But it's still active. We have photographic proof." His face turned a shade I'd never seen before. No anger, no arrogance, just panic. Then came the words I'd waited months to hear. "Sir, based on what we found today, this property is being cited for multiple health and safety violations. You'll receive a formal notice within 72 hours. That was when he turned and saw me, standing quietly in my doorway, arms crossed. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because that look in his eyes, that was the first time I saw fear. Not the fear of getting caught, but the fear of being held accountable. And for once, he didn't have a smug comment. No jokes, no laughter, just silence. Within 48 hours, The notice was taped to the front entrance for everyone to see. A full-page violation report from the city, printed in bold red ink. It listed code after code. Unsafe electrical wiring, improper ventilation, pest infestation, failure to maintain structural integrity. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was the start of a formal investigation. Tenants started talking. People who had been scared to speak up suddenly felt brave enough to share their stories. A few even called the reporter who'd interviewed me, and she ended up publishing a full expose titled Slumlord Empire in the Heart of the City. His name was right there in the headline. The story spread fast. Local forums, Facebook groups, even Reddit threads lit up with comments like, "I live in one of his places. This explains so much." And finally, someone called him out. And buried in the article, there was photos I had taken, evidence I had gathered, all linked to the building we lived in. What hit hardest was what came next. One of the landlord's other properties, the one with asbestos issues, got a surprise inspection. Same thing happened. More violations, more documentation, then another, and another. He couldn't run from it anymore. The city had opened a multi-property case file. The press called it a slumlord domino effect. He tried to fight it, hired a lawyer, claimed he was being targeted, but the receipts didn't lie. Neither did the timestamps, the tenant complaints, or the decades of negligence. Management changed overnight. The building was suddenly under new ownership, but we knew what that meant. He was either forced to sell or pushed into damage control. Either way, the power dynamic had shifted, and this time, it wasn't in his favor. We started seeing repair crews show up, actual licensed workers. The hallway lights got fixed. The front buzzer was replaced. Leaks sealed. Pest control fumigated every floor. Ms. Rosa finally got hot water again, and Malik's kids didn't have to sleep in jackets. But no one forgot how it started. The landlord who laughed at our complaints was now silent. No more smug emails. No more fake promises. Just fines, citations, and a reputation in ashes. And for once, people in the building weren't whispering in fear. They were sharing solutions, helping each other, organizing. It felt like a community again, because the truth wasn't just exposed. It changed everything. A few weeks after the article dropped, I walked past the front of the building and saw something that stopped me cold. A clean, freshly painted notice board installed right by the entrance. On it were laminated flyers, tenant rights, resources, emergency maintenance numbers, a QR code to the city's complaint portal, and, at the very bottom, contact info for a new tenant liaison. It didn't seem real, but it was. I stood there for a long moment, reading every single line, and then I realized this building, the one that once felt like a prison of silence and neglect, had finally shifted, not because someone handed us a solution, but because we forced the system to see us. I still remembered the first time I knocked on a neighbor's door, with a clipboard in hand, unsure if they'd laugh or shut me down. Now, those same neighbors were knocking on my door, asking for copies of their rights, wondering how to file things correctly, and offering to help others do the same. We even held a small meeting in the laundry room. Nothing official, just chairs in a circle, and a shared sense of finally being heard. People showed up. They brought snacks. Someone made a spreadsheet, and that's when it really hit me. This wasn't about one bad landlord anymore. This was about never being powerless again. I got a letter in the mail a few days later from the housing rights organization that had helped spread my story. They were starting a citywide initiative, a tenants watch program, and they asked if I'd be willing to speak at one of their workshops. I hesitated. I wasn't an activist. I was just tired of being ignored. But maybe that was enough. The workshop was small, maybe 20 people, but they listened. Some took notes. Some cried. I told them exactly how I started, with a leaky ceiling and a phone camera. And when I finished, someone stood up and said, "Thank you. Now I know what to do next." That's when I understood what real change looked like. It wasn't just the violation notice, or the press coverage, or even the repairs. It was the shift, in posture, in confidence, in voice. It was watching someone who used to whisper, now speak up without shaking. As for him, he disappeared. Not literally. He still existed somewhere, probably scrambling to save face. But here, in this building, in this neighborhood, his grip was gone. He had no more power to intimidate, no more silence to exploit. And if he ever tried it again, well, let's just say, we'd be ready.